We're live. I don't want to have ads or do ad reads. I want this to feel more intimate than corporate. I want this to be totally user supported. I want you to feel like you have some skin in the game, but I don't want to sell you exclusivity in order to do that. And I'm kind of wondering, is that too thin of a tightrope to walk? So I've got a podcast as well that's called Saddest Night Out, and I've done almost 400 episodes of that podcast. So I'm getting better at showing up on there, even though sometimes I take large gaps between episodes. But I'm still trying to strengthen the muscle that gets me to show up on here more, that gets me to show up on camera more, gets me to show up on camera more in general. And that's why I'm doing 2 videos in one day. There's that idea of immersion therapy where if you're scared of something, you should dive headfirst and do a lot of it to get past that fear. Like if you're scared of heights, you should go to the top of a building, etc. So this is kind of my very gentle version of that as far as going on camera and uploading to YouTube. It's a lot easier for me to show up when you show up. So when I show up, you show up, and then when you show up, I show up, and that's the thing that gets the perpetual motion cycle going, where it feels like a two-way street. It feels like a mutually beneficial interaction. I'll also hopefully get better at finding my words and not have to keep repeating myself slower because I keep tripping myself up. That's the nerd in me. But the more I do this, the better I'll get at it. So it's easier for me to show up when I know you folks will show up. And then when you folks show up, I'm more inclined to show up. And that is the happy cycle. And Patreon, for me, I see it as a way to fortify that. But I'm not really selling exclusivity or extras or things like that right now. Like, I'm not selling access to a private Discord. There's no bonus episodes. There's no extra channel or anything like that. There is a playlist and there is a Google Doc, which I'll explain more about. And even if you only join the Patreon, which is £1 a month, even if you only join for 1 month and then leave, you'll stay on the mailing list, so you'll still keep access to those things for now. But what I think is more valuable is I want everyone who is watching or listening to Saddest Night Out to feel like they can help it exist, which is why it's set at the lowest threshold of just £1 a month. Which, by the way, I think Patreon, it's been a while since I really looked at Patreon, but from what I remember, it tells you if you set the threshold at £1 a month, Patreon says, hey, why not do £2 a month instead? And I can't help but think if Patreon would prefer you to do £2 instead of £1 a month, why is £1 a month even an option in the first place? Why not just set the entry level at £2? And also, if they eventually get rid of the £1 level and it becomes £2 as the minimum, I apologize in advance if my saying this has somehow managed to speak that into existence. But I don't want you to miss out because you can't afford it. In this world, there is no shortage of instances where you miss out because you can't afford something. So I don't want you to miss out because you can't afford it, but I also want you to make the active decision to get involved with Saddest Night Out. I want you to feel like there's some incentive to go beyond just passively enjoying it like you would with most other things, but at the gentlest way possible, hence the £1. So I want you to get involved, if only symbolically. Like how when you see kids in coming-of-age movies and they might spit in their hand and then do a handshake to form a bond. I'm seeing this as kind of like a digital version of that. It's more, I want it to feel like a little bit more than just another thing that you watch sometimes or sometimes you don't. If you have taken an interest in this, I want you to feel like, you know what, I'm betting some chips on this. I'm putting some skin in the game in this. I'm feeling somewhat invested in this. And as I said earlier, even if you only join for 1 month and then leave, you'll still be on the mailing list, so I can still loop you in on what's happening outside of just the YouTube and the podcast, etc. So for now, there's a playlist and there's a Google Doc. So on the podcast, for some of the episodes, I'll mention a particular song that I'm into, and I will add that to a private playlist on Spotify. If you join the Patreon, I will send you a link to join that playlist. And the Google Doc is like the liner notes of the podcast. You know when you buy a physical album and there's the booklet inside with lyrics or whatever? This is like that for the podcast, because it being a somewhat daily thing, it serves as a bit of a diary. And if there's something I want to search to see if I've spoken about it, I can't really search on Spotify or other streaming services because those platforms will only let you search for terms in the title of the episode. So I keep, as well as just to help me make episodes as well, I keep a running, rolling Google document with more in-depth notes of each episode. So if I'm wondering, hey, I'm talking about this artist, have I mentioned them before? I can't really search that on Spotify. I can search that on the Google Doc to say, yep, this artist has a new song out now, but I first talked about them on episode 210. So I've been there from an early time. I also think, and this is just something I don't even have in the notes, I've just thought of it, there is an untapped value in folks who are willing to join something early. The people that are willing to be among the first 100 or the first 1,000 or something, that's premium territory that I don't think gets acknowledged and rewarded enough. I make music on Spotify, by the way. My artist name is Loads of Japanese Bands. And I think I have about 8 monthly listeners because I've almost never spoken about it anywhere, really. But if there was a way to know who your first 100, 1,000, 10,000 monthly listeners are, then that could be the start of a really rewarding relationship on both sides. You were the people that took a gamble on me, that bet on this horse before there was any reason to. And that's something that should be cherished, because I think that's the most potent and necessary fuel for anything to happen culturally. It's the people that say, hey, this is a new thing, I haven't heard anything about it, let me take a chance on it. That's how anything new can become a thing, from those folks who are willing to take that bet early on. On Spotify, as far as I know, there's no way to know who your monthly listeners are. Spotify knows, Apple Music knows, etc. knows, but you don't get a list of, okay, here are the users that we have counted as among your monthly listeners. This Patreon can kind of serve that purpose as well. Whether it's the podcast, whether it's the YouTube, whether it's the music, this is just a way of being like, okay, yes, it says this song had 500 plays, but here is a list of actual people that I know are taking an interest in what I'm doing. In fact, in my podcast, what I tend to do is I say a little code word in each episode, and I say, if you are listening and you hear this code word, send me the code word, either Twitter DMs, YouTube comment, email, whatever. Send me that code word, and then I'll give you a shout out on the next episode, just as a way to have some more tangible idea of who is actually listening, instead of just seeing a number saying 10 people listened, 6 people listened, 50 people listened, 12 people listened. This way I can feel like, oh, these people listened. And that's what I'm trying to make the Patreon represent, which is why it's just £1 a month. And even if you just join it and then leave it, at least you're still on the mailing list. Even if you can't join it, don't want to join it, it's just, I'm trying to find any way, any opportunity to, rather than like siphon out the people who can afford to spend, and thus I can squeeze as much money out of them as possible. I'm trying to siphon out the people who, for them, this is more than just another thing they scroll through and skip now and then. This is, for them, this is something where they're like, oh, I like this guy. What he talks about, what he seems to be into is interesting. I'd like to see where this goes. That's what I'm always trying to seek out. That's what the Patreon is about. And guess who lost their place in their book, in their bullet points again? This guy. So here comes I do this a lot on the podcast, unfortunately. This isn't a great advert for the podcast, but I'll make notes. I'll kind of go through the notes, get caught up in an idea, lose my place in the notes, and then have to like have some slight dead airs. I'm like, wait, what was I talking about again? Where was I? Yes, so I'm not trying, it's less about trying to squeeze every penny out of people. I'd rather than have 5 people pay a tenner each and expect bonus this and this and this, I'd rather have 100 people who can all afford to pay that £1, or even just pay the £1 once. But I know all 100 of you are in this. Like, you feel like, okay, let's go. I'm down for the ride. Let's see where this goes. As for squeezing every penny out of you, there'll be plenty of time to do that later on. But for now, if you want to give more, you can. It's set at £1 a month. If you want to and are able to give 2, 3, 5, 10, whatever, you can choose to do that of your own volition. If you don't want to give at all and you just want to keep watching or listening, you are welcome to do that as well. If anything, I'm grateful that anyone is here. That video I did about being lonely on this platform, it kind of counts for any platform. It counts for putting anything of yourself online. You're just shouting into a void and hoping that someone in that void hears you and kind of shouts back. And that's all I'm trying to find. The folks who are more inclined to shout back so that this feels less like a giant empty void. But I want you to want to be here. You know, I want this to be more than just a passive thing amongst everything else. I want this to be the thing that feels a bit yours. Anyway, if any of that is appealing, the link is in the bio if you want to join the £1 a month Patreon. Otherwise, I will see you on the next one. And hey, 2 videos in one day. Sky's the limit, folks. I'll see you.